Okay, welcome back, brave souls. I'll try to speak on the astral plane too, so in case you fall asleep, that you will, you can listen to the lecture on the astral plane too. So now we are going to talk a little about the process of manifestation in relation to the process of meditation. We will see like the theory today, and tomorrow morning, while exploring the first fragment of the Voice of the Silence, we are going to see a little more of the practice. And not necessarily that we are going to meditate here, but we will see a few more practical instructions. But before, it's good to try to see the theory behind. Another problem that I see in modern spirituality, and I hope I'm not too critical, but one lives in life and tries to understand what is going on, and we see good things and bad things. The good things we don't need to talk about; they are good. So we talk about the problems that we see. And a problem that I see is that we tend to, and we were talking about this with some of you, we tend to rely too much on techniques, on what to do, on easy ways of attaining something without understanding the theory behind. And again, there are two extremes. The extreme of just being interested in the theory, which produces its own form of addiction, you could say. The acquirement of knowledge produces a certain intellectual pleasure, and we can get attached to that. So that is one extreme. And the other extreme is just to disregard things and think that ideas are just in the mind, and that what we have to do is to do something practical, or so-called practical. But I think the idea is that we need both things. Traditionally, in most of the spiritual traditions, for example, in Buddhism today, many people think of Buddhism as a technique of meditation, whether it is Tibetan meditation or Vipassana mindfulness, and that is pretty much what Buddhism is. And the few teachings that they may know about Buddhism are in relation to the practice of that particular technique of meditation. Same with some Hindu schools, that they go to it for the yoga, the meditation, visualization. But traditionally, there is always like these 3 steps in the discipline in Buddhism, in Hinduism, in other traditions. The first one is to hear the teachings, to learn the teachings, to acquire the information. Then you go to a stage of reflection where you make the teachings your own. And along to this, with this stage is a stage of morality where you practice a good life. And then you start with meditation or the techniques. But when they come to the West, because of how we tend to be as Western people, that we want techniques and leave behind everything else, all we know from these traditions is just this aspect of the techniques, which become mechanical. So I think it's necessary to keep in mind, we need a good understanding, and we need then to apply techniques if they suit us. As our friend was saying this morning, for example, with detachment. Detachment is a very important aspect of the spiritual life. And traditionally in Vedanta, Shankaracharya talks about 2 things that are essential: discernment, viveka, and detachment, vairagya. So sometimes in the spiritual teachings also, there may be an emphasis on one of the 2 in isolation, suppose on detachment alone. But Shankaracharya says detachment comes naturally if there is viveka, if there is discernment. If we understand who we are, what life is about, then naturally we let go. But if we focus too much in viveka also, and it becomes a form of mere knowledge, detachment will never come. So it's always good to try to keep both things. So here I am going to talk about the theory of meditation, but from a metaphysical and occult even point of view. The basis of this talk, I think, can be summed up by this quote from The Voice of the Silence, from the fragment 3. It is said, when to the permanent is sacrificed the mutable, the price is thine. The drop returneth whence it came. So when to the permanent, if you see it from a cosmic point of view, you could say the first logos or para-Brahman, is sacrificed the mutable, the manifestation that comes and goes, the price is thine. So when to the eternal in our nature we can sacrifice the mutable, the always changing, then we get the prize, metaphorically speaking. It is not too different from the idea of taking refuge in the Buddha, in the eternal aspect of our nature. So where do we as consciousness take refuge in? In our emotions, in our body? Do we identify with our body and try to make it last looking young as long as possible? Or do we take refuge in our emotions or even in our mind, in our lower mind? Or do we take refuge in the eternal and give the mutable to the eternal? So the idea, and then there is this idea of returning to the source. The drop of water came from the clouds in heaven, they come to earth, and then they go back to heaven. So the drop returns to its origin. So this whole talk is about returning to that eternal aspect, which is the source, as we have seen in all these days. And we will relate it to what Madame Blavatsky, or the symbols that Madame Blavatsky uses in the Proem of the Secret Doctrine, because there are interesting things that we can relate. So she starts the Proem of the Secret Doctrine saying that in front of her eyes there is an archaic manuscript, a collection of palm leaves made impermeable to water, fire, and air, but by some specific unknown process. Of course, before her spiritual eye, we should add. She didn't have them right there with her. And then she says, on the first page is an immaculate white disc with a dull black ground. So this is the first image that she conveys from this manuscript in the Proem. There may be some previous symbols. We talked a little about the white dot and the black background, but for the sake of brevity or to make it more, not to go into too many details, we'll start as Blavatsky did in the Proem. So this is the first image that she describes. And this is, she says, the boundless circle. So she describes the one circle is divine unity. So we start from a state of unity, from which all proceeds. Anything that we encounter, and always start, although we are going to do it explicitly in a little bit, always try to relate the cosmic to your consciousness, as if you are the cosmos. So that's the exercise that we have to develop. So this unity in your consciousness from which all proceeds and whither all returns. Only the face of the disk, being white and the ground all around black, shows clearly that its plane is the only knowledge, dim and hazy, though it still is, that is attainable by man. So the idea is that when we talk about the Absolute as darkness, it's because we cannot perceive it with our mind. We cannot pierce through and see it. As we said, the Absolute is never an object. So it is darkness, and the circle is what we can perceive. It's the subtlest aspect of cosmos and human beings that we can perceive. So Blavatsky describes this in terms of the cosmic principles, which we don't need to go too much into it because we already explored it. So then she says there is para-Brahman and there is Mula Prakriti. We already saw that, the veil on para-Brahman. So we could say that this could be representing Parabrahman, the black ground, and Mula Prakriti, like this veil, the first thing that we can conceive. Remember, Blavatsky said this is the female principle, the first thing that we can conceive of, female in a symbolic way. Then she says on the following page, the same disk, but with a central point. So we have the disk, and then there is a central point. So she says that this second archaic symbol shows the disk with a point, and this is the first differentiation in the periodical manifestations of the ever-eternal nature, sexless and infinite. So this is the dawn of differentiation. In this unity, a differentiation appears. And at the end of the second paragraph, she says that this germ is latent and active periodically and by turns. So Parabrahman is eternal. The germ, the point, which we can relate to the first logos, is also eternal. The difference is that the germ is the mutable aspect of Parabrahman, if we want to put it that way. Parabrahman never sleeps, never wakes up. It is the first logos that, although it is eternal, it changes. Sometimes it's asleep or inactive, and sometimes it's active. So this is the first great cause, in the second paragraph, the first unconscious radiation, the unmanifested logos, but never Parabrahman. And here is what Blavatsky says. If we talk about a first, that means that before it wasn't active. Parabrahman cannot be said to be first active, as if before it was different. Parabrahman is immutable, so it is always there. If anything, it's the eternal cause. And the first cause of the universe, of a particular cosmos, is this first logos, which appears anew and generates a universe. So that's the first logos. Then she says, in its third stage, the point is transformed into a diameter. So from the point, there is this division. And she says the first point is a unmanifested logos, which is simultaneous, and here again you see that it's not a question of processing time. Simultaneous with that line you draw across the diameter. The first line is the father-mother. This is like the second logos. And then she says when the second logos emanates, it is father-mother potentially. So there are some descriptions. The idea with the second logos, as we have seen, the second logos is problematic. Sometimes it is associated to with the first, sometimes with the second. I think we can see the second logos as being the beginning of duality. At the very beginning is a polarity. We still are in unity, but there is a polarization in unity. Maybe I think I mentioned this like an atom. An atom is a unity, but you have the nucleus that is positive, the electron that is negative. There is a polarity there, but it's still a unity. So at the beginning, in the process of evolution, and again beginning is a tricky word, we have this polarity. Eventually, that polarity becomes a duality. It separates, and then that gives rise to the third logos. So it's not different. I mean, we find this in how the root races evolve. The third root race, at the beginning, has the two genders in one. That's like the polarization. And then the separation of sexes occurs, all within the same root race, the first half and the second half. So this is what happens with the second logos. And just as a footnote, and not to dwell too much into that, this second logos, I think, is part of the second logos within the third logos. So this is the second stage within the manifested logos, because Blavatsky said all these logoi are present there at every stage in the cosmos. And we have the three logoi, as we have seen in ourselves. So when we come to the manifested logos, again, we have the synthesis, which is the first manifested logos, then the second manifested logos, and then the third manifested logos. So this happens in the third logos as it happens in the third root race. But we don't need to dwell too much into that. The aim of this is to find the general pattern behind this. So Blavatsky explained that at this point matter begins to differentiate. Before it was homogeneous, now it begins to differentiate. From homogeneity it falls into heterogeneity. And then this differentiation produces the sun. So that's the second logos. Then she says, when the diameter line is crossed by a vertical one, it becomes the mundane cross, the first manifestation of the creative, still passive because feminine nature. So we have this, and then there is a process of manifestation that begins. The forces so far were like horizontal. The things were happening at the level of differentiation, but not really the production of lower planes, if you want to see it in that way. So this is the motion of producing, beginning to produce lower planes. So she says that this is a cross, and the vertical line is male and the horizontal is female. And from this comes Fohat. It's interesting to see that light is a manifestation of Fohat according to theosophy. And if you see the electromagnetic wave in light, it is like a cross. You have the magnetic field going in one way and the electric field going in perpendicular. So actually light is like a cross that is active in the world. So I think this symbol has many possible interpretations. So then she says the manifested logos is a triangle. We have seen that in the past. She sums this up. She says there is no differentiation with the first logos. Remember, the first logos is just the opening in the homogeneous matter, in Mula Prakriti. Differentiation only begins in the latent world thought of the second logos. When the ray appears, that ray is that line, differentiation begins, first as a polarity and then as a duality. And then the full expression of the differentiation becomes with the third logos, when it becomes flesh, manifested. So this is, can be taken as a symbol for the third logos. Then, of course, we have from these manifested logos the primordial seven, these sevenfold hierarchies that we have already seen too. Then we have the swastika, which Blavatsky says is the process of creation. This is a symbol for Fohat. This is a process of manifestation. Once duality sets up and the triad is formed, then Fohat begins to work as a vortex, in spiral. And this is what the cross that was before static, now begins to rotate. And this is a fiery cross. And then the ends of the cross go back because of the motion. And this is what produces a swastika. So she says a swastika is the most philosophically scientific of all symbols. This was even before Hitler was born that she was writing this, and as you probably all are aware, this is a very ancient symbol. In Hinduism and Jainism, it is a symbol for good luck. It actually means swastika, good luck. So she says that it's a very scientific symbol, that few world symbols are more pregnant with real occult meaning than the swastika. It is the emblem of the activity of Fohat. And then she says, one initiated into the mysteries of the meaning of the swastika, say the commentaries, can trace on it with mathematical precision the evolution of the cosmos. So this is the summary of what we have seen so far. We can say that the disk, the white disk, is Mula Prakriti. Remember that Parabrahman is the background. Then we have the first unmanifested logos, sometimes called the hidden father or the concealed father. Then the second semi-manifested logos, the father-mother. Then the third manifested, still in its passive aspect, the sun. And when the work begins, is the active facet of the third logos that is represented by the swastika and forehead. So we have seen all this by now. We are familiar with this. Now, Blavatsky says something interesting, and this is why I went again through the different symbols. She says that the history of cosmic evolution, as traced in the stanzas of Xian, is like if it were an abstract algebraical formula of that evolution. So she says the stanzas give the abstract formula that can be applied with variations to anything in evolution. The stanzas are like the abstract terms of an equation by which you can explain the manifestation of anything in particular. And these symbols are like a summary of what the stanzas talk about. So can we take this as a mathematical formula and see how we can apply it to our consciousness? So the first point, the circle, is like the zero state, Blavatsky calls it, the Laya center. It is the bridge to whatever is beyond the system. We call it Parabrahman. Now, Parabrahman can be said to be present on any plane when you transcend that plane. So the first is the zero state. Then the first logos is a state of undifferentiated unity. Whenever you are in a state of undifferentiated unity on any state level of consciousness, that is the state of the first logos. Then the second logos, the polarity and duality. The third logos is when there are three elements which are the basis for the diversity and activity. And we are going to apply now to our consciousness. So based on this is that we can understand the process of meditation. And what I'm going to propose now is that we have to reverse this process of manifestation to go back to the source, as we saw in the first quote. So the first symbol, the manifested diversity and activity, this represents our normal state of consciousness. We are full of thoughts, emotions, sensations, desires, memories. This is the whole cosmos that goes in our field of consciousness. And of course, we are in the cosmos identify with this. This is a stage of forehead, or the diversity. Now, if you are in meditation and you start looking into your mind, and you try to perceive what is going on, you will discover that there are three elements that are at the basis of all this diversity. It is the feeling of the self, of yourself, the feeling that there is something outside of yourself, the not self, and then the relationship you have with the outside. So these three elements, knower, known, and the perception, the knowledge, or in whichever way you want to put it, is the basis for our whole psychological activity. It's based on these three fundamental elements. And you can begin to see this in a process of introspection. Now, if you watch these three elements playing around, interacting with each other, you come upon a state of duality in the sense of you begin to watch your mind, and the relationship between the thoughts and yourself begins to disappear. That means you stop reacting to what you see. There may be a good thought, a bad thought. You are in this state of witnessing, and it is like if there were only the knower and the known. Of course, there is knowledge there because you are perceiving it, but from a psychological point of view, you are not invested, you are not entangled in that. So it's like if there were only two elements. You are watching and what is being watched. And the thing that is being watched is not affecting what is watching. So, but still it's not a state of unity. You perceive yourself as different from your mind or your emotions. Then if you can remain silent in this state of awareness, you come to a point in which this duality disappears. There is just perception without a consciousness that you are watching something else. And all this, you can actually do it yourself. You can recognize all these steps within yourself. So The idea is that if you dwell enough in this state of witnessing, then you produce this state of unitive perception. So that is like the first logos. This Blavatsky, for example, talks about this aspect in an article. She says, in the act of self-analysis, and before she was saying self-analysis not as a mental thing, but we would call it now self-awareness, self-observation, the mind, which is being watched, becomes the object to the spiritual perception, to the spiritual consciousness. And she says buddhi is overshadowing manas. And this results in the ultimate realization of existence. That is, self-consciousness in its purest form. So she explains in this article that when we start looking inside, when we watch the mind, who is watching there? It is buddhi. And buddhi, remember, is related to the first logos in what she was describing. So when we are watching our mind, naturally we begin to come to this point of unity of the first logos, and we can eventually stay in a state of pure self-awareness. Pure meaning there is a sense of I amness, and there is a sense of I am Pablo. The sense of I am Pablo is a sense that is attached to something in particular. The pure sense of I amness is an undefined sense of being, of existing, without identifying with my mind, my body, my emotions. So this is a state of unitive perception. And when we are there, the door is open to go beyond that particular plane or that particular state of consciousness. If we dwell in this state of unity, at a certain point, we may go beyond those planes in your microcosmos. I'm not talking about astral projection or anything like that. In the yoga, there is this idea of dharma mega. It's like a cloud through which consciousness passes before it becomes aware on a higher state of consciousness. This blankness, this cloud through which we have to pass, is represented by this state, the state of non-differentiation, the state that is homogeneous. And this is not different from the cloud of unknowing in the mystic text, the Christian text. If you see the mystic would say, leave behind in the cloud of forgetting all thoughts, emotions, desires, prayers, images, because that belongs to the third logos. Leave all that behind and plunge yourself in the cloud of unknowing, in that state where there is no perception. This is a state where we go even beyond the unitive perception, the perception of us as a pure center of consciousness. And it is while passing through this cloud of unknowing that we can dawn, or our consciousness can dawn into a completely different state. So before I want now to do a little discussion before the study group, but I wanted to set this up and talk about the general information or pattern, and then I want to engage with you in a little reflection. Now, before we go into that, is there any questions that you have about this? Petra.
Yes, I have a question concerning the swastika. What I see is swastika on the poem. The hands of the swastika go in the clockwise direction. What you have done is the anti-clockwise direction.
No, actually this goes in the clockwise direction. If you see, now suppose that you have the cross. Suppose that you have the cross there and there is fire. If you move in the clockwise direction, then the fire goes back. You see, so if you, for example, you see? So it's turning in the clockwise direction, and then the spokes are going back because they are being left behind. So
the drawing, the first picture of the swastika is where the arms go in the opposite direction from this. So what does
I'm not completely sure. Well, I am going to talk about that, but I'm not really sure. I think that this is the one that she has there. But anyway...
It's on the emblem. It's on the theosophical emblem.
Yes, yes.
On the front cover of the SPE.
Yeah. This is the one that is on the emblem. And I think this is the one that is in the proem. But anyway, it's not too important in the sense that some people, for example, in Hinduism and in Jainism, they use the other one. The other one is the same that Hitler used. And from a certain point of view, the other one is more spiritual than this one. But in the proem, we are using this one because Blavatsky is talking about a particular stage in the cosmic manifestation. The idea is that...
In the proem, it definitely is the other way, because it comes in with Atlantis.
Okay, then probably she was wrong. No. Yeah, no, but the idea with the swastika, and again, the symbols are interpretations, but the general idea is that the swastika that goes clockwise is the one that represents the creative forces. The ones that go anti-clockwise is the one that represents the destructive forces. Now, if we are talking about a process of manifestation, we are talking about the creation of matter and creation of vehicles of consciousness, which at that point is fine. Now, the destruction of matter from a spiritual point of view is anything that you can destroy is what is not true, what is not essentially true. It's like the symbol of Shiva. Shiva, the destroyer, is the patron of the yogis. Not Brahma, the creator, not Vishnu, the sustainer. Shiva, the destroyer, is the patron of the yogis because it's the destroying of the matter, of the imprisonment of the spirit so that the spirit can be liberated. So the swastika that is used in Hinduism, which eventually was used also by Hitler, is a destructing aspect of the swastika. But of course, the original meaning is not to destroy just out of hate, but it's a destroying of limitations, so materiality and all that. And in the Blavatsky, in her ring, she had the other swastika, the destroying one. This one is the one that, if you take that interpretation, would fit with the idea of creating the universe. If you reverse the process, then this has to go the other way because you are like dissolving the forms. I particularly wouldn't get too hung up on the... I know that this is a difficult, symbol, especially in Europe, but both symbols are spiritual. Some people, since we have in the TS emblem the clockwise, some people say, well, this is a good one, and the one that Hitler used is the bad one. There is nothing like good and bad in these universal symbols. But I will double check. I always assume that it was this one just because we are talking about a process of manifestation. But
I've checked it.
and it's the other one.
It's anti-clockwise.
Interesting.
She's wrong.
Yeah, of course. Of course. I have a chat with her. It was the editor. See, that's the easy. It was the editors. This Kigley, they changed it.
But it's a question of the stemple, because you must make the stemple with the opposite.
Yes, we can generate all kinds of explanations and excuses. And
You can look from behind.
yes, no, and what you said at the beginning, well, on the higher planes, things are in a way, and they are reflected in the opposite way on the lower. So Blavatsky was talking about the higher, and I'm talking about the lower.
It's just that I can't remember with her ring if it was. I have a feeling it was a seal. So when you put the seal, and it would be going round the other way.
Yeah, you're right. I know that in the ring it's the other one, but then in the seal, yeah, it gets a clockwise. Yeah. So the both of them are good. Don't worry, but because I've seen some theosophies trying to justify one and not the other, and then you start getting in all kinds of troubles because both were used. So, okay. So any question regarding?
If you could show us the movement again, because it's
So that, yeah, so that goes clockwise, which in my system of the secret doctrine is the one that should be there. Yes.
Is there not an alternative symbol that we could use to represent the same truth, the same principle, given that it's a loaded symbol?
Which one?
It's swastika.
Yeah, you are asking if there is another symbol?
An alternative symbol that can be used to represent the principles, because that's now in the collective.
I know. Yes, well, there are two attitudes about this. The one that I like is probably not the more political one. But, you know, when HPV created this journal, she decided to name it Lucifer. That's the last name, and she was very aware of what she was doing. Actually, there is an article where she explains the reactions of some members when they heard that the journal was going to be called Lucifer. And she says, it's very funny. She, you know, says, a nice lady, you know, with money, and she came and said, but HPV, how are you going to? So she was very aware, and she wanted to, or either she didn't care about, you know, the public reaction, or she wanted to create a public reaction, or if you really know, suppose that in 2,000 years a new religion appears, and they turn the Buddha into a kind of demon, which is what religions do. You know, if you come from a religion, you tend to demonize the previous from where you came to make your religion grow. And that happens even nowadays. So suppose that a new religion trying to eliminate Buddhism, so now Buddha, the word Buddha becomes a synonym for a demon. If you know the real meaning, you are going to use the word Buddha, and you are going to say, no, this is not the demon. The Buddha is the one that brought enlightenment to humanity. So same with Lucifer. She says, Lucifer was never a demon. This is the one that brought the mind and self-consciousness to humanity. So I'm going to use this because this is the correct thing. So one attitude is to say, no, the swastika is a great symbol. As we have seen, it describes the manifestation of the cosmos. So I don't care if people feel offended by it. If they ask, I will explain the meaning, and we still keep it. That's one attitude which, you know, I like to keep, but it's not the absolute truth. Because it is true that some people may not even come to the TS out of the prejudice, and sometimes the prejudice is justified. They may have, you know, people that were killed in the name of that symbol. So I understand that.
Just a curiosity, do you know at which point the Catholic Church started to use the name Lucifer as a demon?
I don't know in time. In the Bible, in the Old Testament, there is only, as far as I know, only one allusion to Lucifer, and it was not in connection with Satan. Satan means the opposer, the opposite force. There is only one reference to Lucifer, and it was in reference to a king at the time that said, I'm Lucifer, in the sense of I am the morning star, I am the light of the world. So Isaiah, I think it was, said, look at you, Lucifer, now falling down into earth. He was talking to this king that was proud and that said, I'm the light of the world. And then the king was, defeated or something. And he said, Lucifer, like a shooting star falling into earth. And then later on, Catholicism or Christianity at the time interpreted that as a symbol for the fallen angel. And then they started using the idea of Lucifer as a demon. But I don't know when in time. Middle Age, yeah, I don't. Probably around the.
She refers to Milton, I think, as I don't know if it, it's the total reason, but that's when it seemed to come in the public consciousness.
Okay, yeah.
Mentioned it in a poem.
It's very possible in Milton, the poet. Milton, the poet, and. So yes, I really don't know at what point in time, but that's how it generated.
Did she have a double title to Lucifer? Was it not the light bringer? Did she not have
the light bringer, I think.
Did she not have another few words on that page? Was it not Lucifer the light?
Yeah, the light bringer.
Yeah.
Now, the second part of the answer is, we could use something like the yin yang. The yin-yang is in a sense related to that, we could use that, but I don't see why we should. But if you feel comfortable, you are free to do it.
Pablo, she did it on purpose, but because somewhere she says to William can judge your path is pure Buddhi, and my Lucifer is combative manas.
Yes.
So she wanted to start a fight.
Yeah. That's pretty evident in her character, but also when in this article, the first article in Lucifer, when she says what's in a name, and she has a very combative, and you know. Sometimes I feel in the Theosophical movement that we are paying a lot of attention to how people will react to us, and we want to be loved and liked, and then we start saying polite things, and we don't point out to the mistakes that may be out there, and then if we take that route, we may end up being irrelevant because we just say what people want to hear. I'm not proposing that we should be like HPV and, you know, in your face to everybody, but still, if you have HPV's wisdom, then you can do it. If you don't have HPV's wisdom, then be careful. But we should stick to truth. If people don't like truth, well, try to present it in the best possible way, but present the truth. And then the movement will bring something that is of value. Because if we just say nice things, we will become irrelevant. So I think HPV was great in that role, of course.
We had a problem with this in the Scottish society at one point. And I think the idea at the end of the came to is why would you let a rather unpleasant dictator affect an eternal truth in any way whatsoever? That is a very, very dangerous path to go down.
Yes, it's a problem. This thing happens, and both sides have a piece of truth. Those who feel offended, and those who say, "Well, you shouldn't feel offended." So it's not an easy matter, but we are here to educate people, and those who are open to hear, we can give the explanations. That's why we should learn a little more about the swastika if we don't know. I just read a couple of things. Blavatsky says quite a bit more in the Secret Doctrine of her writings. Any other question about this?
It's just amazing when you mention the swastika, what an emotive subject within the room it is.
Yes.
It says something.
Yes.
That says something as well.
Yes, and we have to be ready for that because it is true. I remember the first time I saw it, I saw also the six-pointed star, and I said, well, that's interesting. The swastika and the six-pointed star are together. That may mean something. I didn't know anything about the TS. It's just I entered the room and I saw the emblem. But most people seem to focus only on the swastika, not that the other symbol is there, which none of them are either Jewish or, German, and they transcend time.
Actually, just as a sort of by the way, in 1974, I wrote to Geoffrey Farthing and asked him about the wisdom religion, and he wrote back to me and he sent me the symbols of the TS. And I wrote back to him and said, why is the swastika going the wrong way? And he wrote back to me and said, which way do you think it should go?
Yeah.
So now in 2014, we still asking the same question.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to work out if the snake being cannibalism and anti-vegetarian.
No. It is a soy snake. So it's not, it is a vegetarian snake to begin with. Yes. Okay, so if there are no more particular questions about this, what I wanted to talk now a little more about, not in the form of a lecture, is this idea of going from duality to unity. Because tomorrow the voice of the silence will be everything about it. And the first fragment is pretty much about, merging the two with the one. And then we can talk a little about an aspect that is usually difficult to perceive really deep. Because our personal consciousness is based on this dual consciousness. There is myself and there is the world. So myself at the beginning is my body, my emotions, my thoughts. Then I begin to realize that myself, that the body and the emotions are separate from me. I'm beyond that. And usually I identify myself with my thoughts. Then eventually we realize that we are not even the thinker, talking about the psychological thinker, but that we are behind that. And, but that step from the thinker, from the identification with the psychological thinker to behind, which is where the unitive perception can arise, is really difficult. And it's perhaps not so difficult at the level of skill. It's difficult at the level of we have such a strong identification with the thinker that it's difficult to perceive how I'm not the thinker. So if I'm saying right now that I am not the one that is speaking, you know, there is obviously somebody that is telling all these concepts, and I say I am not the one that is speaking. So what do you think it means? You may not agree on that, and then we can discuss it, but how does it work? What do you think you are if you are not the one that speaks, and who is speaking then? This is the voice of the silence. Do you agree that, for example, when you are giving an answer, I mean, I'm taking now the point of view of the Advaita philosophies, the non-dualistic philosophies. And I want to see this from that particular point of view. Any particular point of view is relatively true. There are some things that can be said, but I want to do a little exercise into a non-dualistic perception. So whoever wants to answer the question, and then explain who answered the question. Not with a theory, but be aware. Yes?
It is the same as you always say, as it breathes me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. There was
I'm aware of it. Something within me breathes.
Okay.
It breathes me.
What's that word she said? Breathes. Breathes.
Like breathing, you mean? That it breathes through you?
In Germany we say, es atmet mich, it breathes me.
Yeah, to breathe.
Yeah, that's how I took it. There was an old member in the TS in Argentina that used to say, who is thinking you? Or who is thinking in you? So you say that. So who are you when you are answering the question? Who are you? In the components of, this is a phenomenological approach to consciousness. If you tell me I'm Atman, yeah, you are technically right, but I want to see what we perceive in consciousness. You know, phenomenology is an approach to philosophy, sometimes a little superficial, but it's interesting, in which you deal not with theories, but with whatever you can perceive. What elements can you perceive in your consciousness? So I'm giving this answer, and the evident element here is the thoughts and the thinker. Somebody is answering. Now, spiritual teachers come and tell me, you are not the thinker. So if I'm not the thinker, the one that is answering now, what I am right now in the process of talking. So when you answer the question, what aspect of consciousness can you perceive there that you are? Now, you don't need to have an answer, I'm just asking.
I'll be interested in her answer.
Well, I want us to work together, then I can say whatever I perceive, which doesn't mean that it's the truth.
I would like to begin.
Yes, go ahead.
Just thinking. I like the metaphor of the mirror. So I guess, but it's already connected to consciousness per se. For something to be conscious, you need something that is aware of something, whatever that is. So you already have this reflection in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that thinking is an aspect of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a reflection but then transferred into thoughts.
Yes, that is a...
Consciousness is like this beam of light reflecting on...
That is a perfectly good metaphysical explanation. I agree. You have an A. Now, what I'm asking is not that. Is in the act of speaking, and be patient because this is something that we normally don't do, and it's perfectly fine. But in the act of speaking, what do you actually perceive? Look inside. I'm looking inside right now. I'm talking and I see my hands moving. I see my brain thinking or see or perceive. But what else do you perceive? If you are not the thinker, what are you in the process of answering? And look inside. Forget about the theory. Look inside.
We're talking about presence.
Presence.
An instrument.
Okay, Lola, keep thinking. I'll go back to you. No, you said presence.
No, I really think it depends on what you're talking about. But the way, I mean, the level at which you are is so different when you are just chatting.
Yeah, well, right now, yes, it's different. Right now, what do you perceive?
Right now, because I'm working on my astral mind, maybe I'm getting some kind of inspiration, which I like very much that word because it's the same in Spanish, inspiration for breathing and inspiration for getting some kind of musa for the art, you see?
Mm-hmm.
The same word, it's very funny.
Mm-hmm.
So the real inspiration, so when your mind is on calm, it's a different wave.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you are speaking right now, can you listen to yourself as you speak? So go on speaking and listen with your ear to your words. Yeah, I'll go there. Yeah. Can you listen to yourself?
I'm listening. Yes.
Okay. Try to speak. Not now, but we will get there. But try to add that element, listening to yourself as if somebody else is talking, because that may give you the clue to what you can perceive.
Somebody else is talking.
Yes. Erwin and then David, and then we'll go back. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not looking at this side. You wanted to say something. Okay, let us finish with Erwin. Okay, go on. Yeah, you had asked.
I wanted to
But
say that.
Boys, boys.
And I will repeat it if necessary. Yeah.
When I'm speaking and I think that it's me speaking, I'm bringing in, as if I'm identifying with the thinking, with the thoughts, with the words, and if I am, as if I am free of that, I'm as if aware of that, of what I'm speaking. I'm not identifying myself as if I am speaking. Then there is like a feeling of freedom.
Are you listening to yourself as you speak? I'm sorry to interrupt. Okay, go on.
Like a sense of freedom from being connected to what I'm saying, how it sounds, and I don't know, many things that maybe are there that I bring from somewhere in the past. As if there is some freedom. I speak what I speak, and it comes, no identification. As if there is a freedom for me.
So she talks about like a freedom or a certain sense of space between the speaking and something else. Okay, we'll go into that. Yeah, Julie, you had something?
Just thinking that it's consciousness first, and the voice and the body and everything else are the vehicles of consciousness. So.
Yeah, so Julie, in case she says there is consciousness first and then the voice and the vehicles of consciousness. Yes, again, that's very correct, but I'm interested in asking what you perceive inside yourself as an experience. What can you actually see? And the first times we try to do this, we don't see anything, but this is part of what the voice of the silence, as we are going to say tomorrow, talk about going and trying to perceive the producer of thought. What is behind the production of thought. So we are doing just a little exercise as an example of what we can do in meditation. So Erwin first, and then David, and then you, and then, yeah. If you have anything to say, and listen to yourself as you say it.
Yes. Well, did you say what is it when you're not the thinker?
Mhm.
Is that the question?
Yes.
And
What is
I'm
any other
wondering
element?
If that is possible.
Mhm.
So
That is the way, a good way to begin.
I cannot see other than my thoughts.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I can observe my thoughts, but then again, what is observing thoughts?
All right.
Thinking.
So there are two elements that you are talking about, the thoughts and the awareness of the thoughts, the observation of the thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Now then you think that the observation is another thought.
Is actually thinking.
Okay, keep looking into that. There is something there in this thinking and being aware of the thinker.
I mean, it connects to the good quote you had from I think it was the Mahatma letters, that when there was a distinction between active conscious thinking, which we are trying how now, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and the subconscious, non-active, the usual thinking we do,
Mm-hmm.
but not really aware of the process of, not creating elementals, but producing elementals
Mm-hmm.
that are already there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so keep looking whether the awareness of the thoughts is another thought or not.
Okay.
David.
Well, I think one can distinguish. One has to stay with one's experience.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Because one gives explanations after the experience. One of the things that is habitually in our mind, as far as I know by looking within, is that if we are very honest when we're speaking, there is even no sense of I in it. It's only afterwards we claim ownership to it, or not.
Mm-hmm.
So there seems to be a spontaneous process when you're speaking. At most moments, that doesn't mean that what you're saying is inspirational. It can be from your subconscious, pure associative, and not very high quality. You can just be bad.
Mm-hmm.
But a good artist, for example, is completely, there's no sense of I when he's doing his art. But there seems to be an in-between stage where you can learn to be present while thoughts are coming up in and out of that presence. That presence is in itself not a thought.
Mm-hmm.
And it requires a lot of exercise and experience to find it out. But when I'm now speaking, it's difficult to be present and then witness that the words are coming from themselves. I will be even more honest. The more I would try consciously think when I'm speaking, I'll stumble over my own words.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes.
Which shows that if the personal ego is involved in what I'm saying, all creativity will stop immediately.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very difficult process to go from lower manas to higher manas. And I think one of the biggest mistakes with theosophical students, but that's only my personal view, is to think that higher manas is a different kind of lower thinking about higher things.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's a state of awareness
Mm-hmm.
that's capable of perceiving lower things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of the reason of the confusion is that the word intellect has deteriorated in Western culture.
Mm-hmm.
Until the 18th century, the word intellect meant perceiving. The word theoria for the Greek meant mirroring divine ideas, not an intellectual activity. And when we study theosophical writings, and HPV uses the word intellect, she very often uses it in the pre-18th century, not as it is used in the 19th and 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
And by being aware of that, more often, the theosophical movement would not be so intellectualized, as is very often the case.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean you have to shut down thinking in the ordinary sense, but it shows that has to be done much more phenomenological, experiential research in how the mind works, instead of filling that in already a priori with what one thinks the mind is, without ever looking really within what's happening when one is saying something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, I echo that. We have mystical experiences, and we quite often say, I can't put it into words. And I think words themselves, if you look in relationship to truth, whatever truth is, words destroy truth, like truth in the sense of a divine revelation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Words destroy it every time, whatever combination So to me, words are simply, we need words to be able to have a thought. And we put it into concepts, into areas of limitation. And we add these together and we create a model. Now, if those words are useful, that they describe a model of reality, then we can say, well, those words are true. But it's only a relative truth. And I think it's the same between the lower manas and the upper manas, is in the lower manas we use words, and we use words in thought. The upper manas, we don't use words, because words kill truth.
Yeah, it's true, but let us fall back to the experience. Try to fall. Yes.
I think that how difficult it is, it doesn't matter. We have to make a distinction between buddhi and the Buddhic aspect of manas. Manas is sevenfold. So on 7 levels of thinking, there are thoughts. And we talk now here only about the thoughts that have a form. And if you think about a strawberry sorbet or a car or whatever, those are thoughts with a form. A form we can see with our senses. But the universal concepts of liberty, of brotherhood, of compassion are also thoughts when they are thought by a thinker. And that is the Buddhic part of manas. And that is not yet buddhi. Yes, that's, you have to differentiate.
Yes, completely.
And Blavatsky makes it so easy for us in the key. She talks about that part of us which is the player of the role, and the part that is the role. And we can find both of those things in ourselves. Our reincarnating part is the player, and our personality is the role. And when you have to give a lecture on what you do now, you have some very fundamental, universal ideas, concepts, and they are thoughts on a very high level. Not having a form anymore, for freedom doesn't have a form. Yes? But you still can train yourself to let freedom be a living part of your, or liberty or honesty or whatever, be a living part of your life. So it is something in you. And the player of the role, the reincarnating part, can try to explain that through the persona. And then you think in yourself, am I able with my role, with my person, to explain in words, and do I do that well enough? So when you give a lecture, 2 parts of yourselves are active. The one part that sees the universal concepts, or perhaps not see it very clearly, but tries to see it, and your persona, your role, yes, your Pablo, trying to explain it in words. And you always have to check, does the persona do the job right? Yes, 2 things active at the same time. So you are both eyes. Yes, is that a little bit...
Yes. Again, as an explanation is perfectly, I completely agree. My main purpose here is to try to see what we actually see of this process, because we can actually perceive this process at the beginning hazy. At the beginning we don't see anything, then we keep trying and we start seeing, and then this process begins to be clear as a perception in ourselves. And one of the ways we do it is first by having an intellectual clarity about it, and then by trying to actually see it in ourselves. So I know there are a few more hands and we'll have time for you, but we also have to finish. Yes, so I just want to wrap this up, but what is, I'll let you talk, try to be brief, the 3 of you.
You haven't actually defined what a thought is. One defined a thought. point to the Sanskrit term pragya parad, the state of the intellect. So my answer to the question would be I associate myself with my thoughts because it is a mistake of the intellect.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, maybe also this whole exercise shows how much power there is in silence.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, because that can only be perceived in silence. Yeah.
Well, coming to the original question, what is behind thoughts? I really think we only have the reminiscence of what is really behind reminiscence, what a lost memory or something that we cannot perceive until we contemplate, like Plato said. I mean, so not really possible to answer. It's a reminiscence.
All right.
That there is something else behind us.
And you wanted to say anything? Yes. Oh, okay. So my point, and I'll leave it to you. While we are talking, there is an awareness of being of talking. There is this observer that Erwin was talking about. The problem is that this observer normally expresses itself through thinking. So it's very difficult to have this attitude of observing when the thought is not there, because thinking is a normal vehicle of consciousness. This is why Descartes, looking inside, said, I am, therefore I think. Now, when there is this process of thinking going on in this field of consciousness, there can be also the awareness of the witnessing of this thinking, which is perceived as something beyond the thinking. But what we have to try is once and again perceive this awareness, and you will discover that it's beyond the thoughts. But the only way to discover it is by turning your attention once and again, as HPB said there, by looking at the thinker. This space will be established, and you will become aware of the witness in itself. And that's part of our work. Yeah, we have.
How do you know that it's beyond thoughts?
Just watch it, and then you will. Yeah, because the answer is theory. What I'm interested in, what you can perceive. Yeah. So keep watching it, and you will see what happens. Yeah. Okay. Thank you all. Yeah.